I'm Jack Bankowski, for any of you who don't know, and I organize these Tuesday seminars with my colleague Walid Bashti, but maybe not very well since this one is falling on a Monday. I'm very happy to introduce R.H. Quaytman. Quaytman's paintings add an important shading to our discussion this semester around the fate and state of contemporary painting. How does painting live on in our post-medium present? The question was broached when, in anticipation of his opening talk, Stephen Prina invited us, via an essay by critic David Joslet, to consider Martin Kippenberger's demand that by the early 1990s, a painting, if it's to matter, would have to explicitly visualize networks of distribution, of exhibition, of everything in which it implicitly circulates. I quote the artist for the second week running, not just because I'm a lazy hack, but because I think it provides some pretty relevant glue. Jorge Pardo, a painter, I suppose, if Prina is one, followed the next week by announcing his intent to make not only paintings, but also lamps and buildings discursive. Discursive in the sense that each performs and makes legible its fraught condition as a site of art. Finally, Josh Smith's answer to our painting question came in the guise more immediately identifiable as the art form in question. Smith inhabits painting, but he makes it speak anew only by at the same time upending its customs. Tonight we welcome Quaytman, a painter who, perhaps it won't surprise anyone now, refers to her project as a book and organizes her output in chapters. Her conceit, as I understand it, was originally devised as a bid to own her output, that is, to give her paintings another life alongside their life as singular objects, fated to be dispersed by the machinery of art, or worse, forgotten in a dusty storage vault. If you don't have a book, Quaytman has counseled, make one. If you don't have a writer or historian, become one. And if you don't have a dealer, Quaytman, as it's widely known, co-founded Orchard, the influential cooperative-run exhibition and event space that concluded its 3-year run on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 2008. Quaytman calls her painting a book and distributes it in her own space, maybe more than incidental to her art in its overarching structure. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Jack. You're very dogged about getting speakers here. That's why I kept saying no, and then finally I saw a window that I could come. So, but the thing is, I unlike me, usually I'm very, very kind of explaining and writing everything down and working on these elaborate visuals for you for talks, but I can't do that anymore because, for one, I've just been sort of very, very working really hard in the last two years, and things have changed, and I don't really quite understand where they're going or what the rules are making me do in a way. Like they're definitely directing me somehow. Like that was something I never could have predicted. And so just to be really brief, because often I make the talk kind of all about the kind of structure and the rules that I work with, is that every exhibition I do since 2001, I call a chapter and it's numbered. And so I just finished chapter 27, which was in New York, but it's a chapter that's headed for Brazil. And the other point is they're always on wood panels. They come in one of 8 nesting sizes, and they're dispersed after the exhibition, and they can be recombined or not, or never seen again. But I have, if they're photographically based images, I have the films always, so I can deploy that image again if I need it or want it, or like, for example, I did that in this exhibition called Spine, which was the first 20 chapters, which I made. Basically, the site of the exhibition was a book, but it was also a kind of self-made retrospective. And so the reason so this talk is going to be me just thinking loud and to show you how complicated the situation is now and how it's almost becomes a more and more complicated puzzle for me to unravel, all leading up in a way to this show that I'm going to be doing at MoCA with Bennett Simpson in this fall of 2016 as it stands now. So, and I'm thinking of that as a kind of retrospective, but when I say retrospective, it doesn't mean exactly that I'm going to go and borrow old paintings back, but that I'm going to kind of understand what the chapters have been saying, or like a kind of conclusion, or not a conclusion because it won't be the end, but a summation, I guess you could call it. So what I wanted to talk about just in a very kind of free-form way tonight is just the last chapter 26, which was called Voyelle, and that because I find this last 4 chapters that I've been working on all interconnected. And it's the first time that that's ever happened so clearly. But so the first well, here, this, by the way, is a small painting I made for a friend of mine named Daniel Heller Rosen, who's, I guess you could call him a philosopher, but a philosopher through language. And I always say, Daniel, give me an idea to make a painting about grammar, because I always use grammar and ideas about grammar, which I'm extremely bad at, by the way, to try to come up with an idea of how to situate or look at a painting. And so I ended up making him this painting, and it's because he gave me this word copula, and copula, which is a suggestive word, I admit, but it, as is the painting. But it's basically a word which links subject and predicate, like the word is. So anyway, there's that. I'll just say also that I have a fetish for Keynote and all its magic. If only paintings could do what Keynote can do, that would be good. So this is, you can see that typeface here. That's good, because once I did this talk and with that typeface and it was completely illegible. But, okay, so these are the chapters. Chapter 1, the sun, Voyelle. Oops, Voyelle should have been up there because this is what I'm going to be talking about. I feel like the last end of a kind of section in my work was called the one passing through the opposite of what it approaches, and that was for the Renaissance Society in Chicago. And it was a kind of, the paintings reflected on, I have a good example of a painting here. I'm going to try this for the first time ever, freeform. Okay, that's an example of, it's with Buren and Tironi mashup in a sense, but they were both from these shows that were there, and it was sort of looking into the history. So I'm sorry if you don't really have any idea what I do, because I'm not going to really be explaining it. But if anybody wants to ask a question or is totally confused, just ask, and I'll try to explain. All right, so back to this. So that, copula, chapters, and let me go, there's this. Okay. So this is an image, this is a painting I saw in Tel Aviv, in the Tel Aviv Museum, where I am, at present, I'm working on the chapter for Israel, for Tel Aviv, which, as you can imagine, is a challenge. But I just love this Cezanne because it's so funny and strange, and it's just the drunkards, and I love their kind of shitty label there that's all sort of dirty, but I thought it also was a kind of copula. And I guess it was interesting to hear what you said also, because more and more I'm realizing how this problem of language and words is so deeply tied to how to begin to try to think about how to make a painting or a picture, or just pictures in general. This is just a diagram to show the sizes and how they sort of nest together. All right, so this is Voyelle, and it was for a group show that had to do with economics, but I didn't really try to make the paintings about what the show was about, because I just wasn't thinking about that. But I was thinking, I guess they felt that my work does address, just in its nature, issues of economics, because of the way it kind of, the site of what is, I think, best about my work is its installation. And so when the pieces are dispersed, their value is, it has value, but to me it's not as valuable as the event of their first kind of composition as a group. But I'm more and more getting kind of adventurous with putting different kinds of images together to try to make a kind of picture sentence, I guess you would call it. But at the time, this is another complicated thing about my situation now. At the time, I knew that I was doing a chapter for Israel, and I knew I was doing a chapter for Brazil. So, but Brazil was first and foremost on my mind, because I'd been invited to make a group of paintings for this very strange place in the middle of nowhere in Brazil called Inhotim. And they gave me the opportunity. They said, design a pavilion and make the paintings for it. So I said, yes, I will take that offer, definitely. So, but it was incredibly difficult, and probably the hardest, it felt the hardest thing I ever did, in a way, because I'll get into that later. But I used this chapter to begin thinking through ideas I had about Brazil. And I just put this diagram here because voyelle means vowel in French, and titles are incredibly important to me. I just obsess over what will be the title, and it almost is one of the most important things, what will be the title. But always the title has, like all words, many meanings, like many suggestions and many echoes. So it's interesting to me now, in retrospect, because I just realized I've been thinking a lot about Hebrew now, and there's no vowels in Hebrew. It's just consonants, basically. And okay, keep going. All right, so this was the first painting I made to think through this, like the stages of this painting. And I saw this little print in Rome, and I love that idea of this bandolero, I think it's called. It's a kind of tradition they used to have of painting sentences or words or alphabets on these ribbons that would go through the image. So I loosely based this and changed it many times, but I really loved how all kinds of strange ideas about the letters themselves came out in this painting. I mean, like H and I never would have thought of that. H and I are so similar, you know, just the way they look. And also the way, like, C is sort of like near the K of that ribbon. I kept changing where the letter would be on the ribbon, and also the sequence of it, and N and Z. Wait, no. Anyway, I got pretty lost in working on that. And just to explain a little bit that thing about the Hebrew and the consonants, I show this word down here, which means heart in Hebrew, but heart is Levi, or Lev. So that big one that looks like a camel is the letter L, and the other one's the letter B or V. So you just get LV, and then you get Lev. I love that. It's so economical. So, okay, that's Brazil. I read that there were these incredibly ancient paleo, whatever that word, really ancient wall cave paintings. What's it called? Petroglyphs. So I went and saw them one day, and I just include it because it was really one of my favorite day, I think, in Brazil. And I took 2 trips and traveled all over. And it was very profound seeing that. It was way up high and incredibly hot and the most dramatic sight. But it's pictures and language and math there, the beginning. And so I guess in a way that's what I'm kind of, sort of getting at. Like basically I'm trying to think about those things. Language, letters, numbers through geometry, and that. So this is what I couldn't figure out what to do at all. And then finally this happened. It was like a horrible mistake. And I said, let's try polyurethane, to my assistant, Peter. And so he brought that into my studio. And I screamed and laughed. And I said, let's put it on this panel. Let's see it. And then I just had it up in my studio for about a month. And then I saw finally these profiles in it. Do you see those profiles? Because it took a while to see those profiles and many late nights staring at it. But then, so that was the first, that sort of got me started, that painting on the Brazil chapter. It was like, I was angry. I was pissed. Like how am I going to ever have the authority to talk about anything about Brazil? It's too powerful, too big, too foreign, and I felt all kinds of guilt about it and discomfort. But then this, weirdly, on another sideline, I had been thinking a lot that I wanted to do something about Ludwig of Bavaria someday, about what's the name? Oh God, now that name's slipping me. The one, it's the Valhalla. And so, but instead of that, my friend Thomas Egger said, oh, do you know about Sissi, the Empress of Austria, Sissi? I said, no. He said, oh, you need to check her out because there was a great TV German show, I think it was German, when he was growing up that I guess a lot of gay boys and teenagers loved, with Romy Schneider, who is pictured there dying, I guess. And another interesting tidbit about this is that the woman who plays Romy Sissi's mother in the TV series was Hitler's favorite actress, apparently. So just that's a tidbit. Okay, then the other thing we're going to is that I read a lot when I'm thinking about a chapter. So each group of painting has, in a sense, its own library. And for Brazil, I went to the obvious thing that you always go to, or one would go to, which would be Claude Lévi-Strauss and Tristes Tropiques. And I loved that book so much. Love that book. I really recommend it to everybody. So I kept reading a lot of Claude Lévi-Strauss, and then I read this book of his called Savage Mind, and in it he talked about this rough, like this thing. Oh no, I don't have it. A rough, and about how trying to explain, I guess, indigenous art from North America, and the idea of the miniature and detail. And it turned out that the painting he was referring to was an empress of Austria. So then I had my link. Oh, I can do that, and then and it gave me an idea to paint that, to copy that rough. And these little hand-painted paintings, often they take a lot of time, and I paint them while I'm trying to figure out what other mainly photographically based images to use. So I ended up using this image of Sissy's death mask because she had been stabbed through the corset by an Italian anarchist, I think in Geneva or somewhere, and died. You know, she had very eccentric, wild woman, very interesting. Read the book, get the series. She was obsessed with her hair, which would take like 5 hours to brush. And she was an incredible horse rider. And she was an extreme liberal. And she just basically left the emperor eventually and decided to go off wandering through Europe, but ended up being stabbed by this anarchist. But the thing that kept her alive was her corset. I love that story. But that must be her dying. Or maybe, no. Anyway, that's her real death mask with a little diamond dust on it. And then, so I put it next to, so you have the rough, the scary face, which I then photographed and printed onto this black gesso, and then put this edge, you see the edge, because all the paintings are on plywood panels that have a beveled edge just like that. So in the middle, I put this edge coming right out of the painting, as if like suddenly this other painting was, you know, coming suddenly out of the middle of the painting. And I had never done that before, so it was really, I was happy to do it. And it was such a, and also it brought home the fact that it is a Janus, you know, a Janus head, because still often people don't see it. But it also made this particular chapter very ominous and scary and creepy, actually. And I like the idea of a group of paintings becoming scary or having you know, a kind of affect or mood. Or I always thought it would be so great if I could figure out how to make the cliffhanger chapter, but actually I think inadvertently I'm doing that now, kind of. But this is another idea I did in this chapter, because it's very hard to see in this picture, but I had a bigger panel next to it, and then I put a shelf on the painting, on the surface of the painting, and then it was the death mask printed, but it's sinking below the shelf behind the op pattern. Okay, cut two. So things got out of hand with with the polyurethane, but I got this idea from Sadie Benning, of all people, who I was looking at her painting and I was like, God, I wish I could really make big paintings, you know, like you're doing. I wish I could do that. Because I can't, because it's a rule that I have and that I'm going to stick to, but also it wouldn't work with the kind of panels I use, because they would begin to warp, or there wouldn't be physically possible. So she was like, but yeah, but you can go forward. You don't, you know, it doesn't have to be that way. Literally. So then, yes, that's true. I could go forward. So we poured more polyurethane, like the one you saw previously, the blob. We just made a big blob like that. And then also Brazil appeared, Latin America. That was a complete accident. But that is to me so seriously drawing too, and so great and strange about an image, or yeah, how pictures work. And so I did feel very much that the Brazil chapter, it's called utópico, which means the subject or the topic. And so it was what will be the subject, really, what will be the subject of Brazil. I mean, it's impossible. There's no way to answer that question. And that was the problem. And I liked how also it rhymed with trees tropique or tropical, but also and topical. But what is the matter? You know, what can you possibly try to get at all in a painting, you know? Because it is often thought of as firstly matter or material or a physical thing. And so that was just, it was a relief. It really was a huge relief to figure that out, that I could do it. So that's the other side of it, when I hung it in the installation, in this very tight space where you had to you felt a little bit like squeezed by it. And across from it was this a painting this image from, I found out that there's this American poet, Elizabeth Bishop, who had spent a lot of time in Brazil, and I found out that she had taken a lot of photographs and that they were in Vassar College has her archive. So I went and found and picked some photographs that I liked to work with, and that became that. And now Toki, no Toki. Well, that was the other problem, because about Brazil, it belongs to you, Brazil. I really also felt that very much. You really worked with that country so much. But anyway, what can I say about this? Oh God, I had an idea about it. Oh yeah, I had these. First of all, we came up with this idea of this pavilion, which I'll show you, which looks like, with this architect, Solveig Fernland. She knows my work, and we discussed it, and she just right away came up with this idea of this image on top. And it's basically uses the geometry of the panels that I've been working with, which is the golden section or the Fibonacci spiral. And it's quite small, and it was going to have 3 rooms. And what I wanted to do was, after visiting the park, it's like a big sculpture park basically, was to make a very public paintings for people, like, quote unquote, for people, like, because in the art world, it feels sometimes like you're just making paintings for you guys or a few other painters or a few other artists, like very specific. It very rarely to me feels like I'm making paintings for a busload of kids coming from their school or something. So I thought, I'm going to try to do that and make paintings for children, paintings for teenagers, paintings for adults, paintings for old people. But of course I couldn't do that. And I really, really stuck to that plan for so long. That's what I wanted to say about that image. This one is that finally I figured out the children's painting, and it was don't touch. Like, I needed to scold and be scary, and like that was what was blocking me. But anyway, also the other thing about this chapter is I started using encaustic, which I'd never used before, and so a lot of it is trying to just figure out how to use encaustic. And I liked it because I really thought I could almost make like these anatomical models like they have in Italy, you know, with wax, and it's very body wax, and so that was kind of really great to learn how to do that. Actually, let me just go through the next one. Okay, so this is why I had such a hard time figuring out how to talk about this. My last 4 chapters, or this group of work that I'm in the midst of, is because each chapter goes to another one to another. They're all now melting into each other in a way that hadn't happened before. And so I like to be very linear and kind of, I like diagrams and clarity, but it's getting hard to figure out how to lay this out for you, how to tell the story, in effect. You know, what is the story or where it's going. But while I was working on Brazil, I knew I also had to do this chapter for Israel. And while when I do, I don't know how I became like the National Geographic artist, but I'm always traveling all around, and I don't even like to travel, but it's happened that I am now going very different places to make paintings for. And so I had to go to Israel while I'm working on the Brazil chapter, and we go to Jerusalem, and they at the museum, the Israeli museum, they own the Angelus Novus, and so the director was friends with the curator. He said, "Oh, let us show it to you. It's down in our little room in the basement, storage room, but it's our most precious art object," he said, which sort of surprised me because they've also got the Dead Sea Scrolls and a lot. They have a lot, but anyway, though this is the most, because as you know, I mean, I can't even begin to explain the complexity of the history of this image, although if you don't know this image, you should know it. Otherwise, you don't graduate from your MFA. You need to know that, because it was Walter Benjamin's drawing, and he bought it in 1920, I think it was, and based a lot of his ideas about what history is, basically, and what a picture is, and what language is, all often using the Angelus as a metaphor. But anyway, okay, to that, I say, what's the print it's glued on there, that print? And they go, oh, I don't know what that print is, the curator, I don't know. And no one had ever asked what that print is, which is so crazy, because Clay put it on. It didn't happen after, because that's the other thing. I feel like I'm backpedaling always in my ideas, but Clay, who was ordinarily before an artist, I really felt repulsion towards, because he was a kind of innocence in his work that I felt has been inherited in a very bad way by painting this century, basically, that this kind of childlike quality of painting that I really, really am against. So anyway, but since that time, I've found out that, in fact, the two of us are very similar in he was incredibly systematic about all his work and cataloging his work. And he was also obsessed with the edge. In most of his work, there's this very, very intense attention to how it's framed, and also the title. And there's always often a sharp line at the bottom, which is a lot like me with my edges. But anyway, so that's that. But also the whole thing about the Angelus is it's the angel can't close its wings because it's facing this is where it gets complicated. It's facing the past, and there's just a pile of shit and rubble just piling up, and it's so violent and just such a disaster of destruction that it can't even close its wings. This is the part I don't quite understand, because there's such a storm coming from heaven. So it's a storm coming from both directions, in a sense. But it's all about the past and the future, and you can't read the future. We can never know the future. So I thought, well, that would be, you'd want to know what the print was behind it, because that's, so what is it? So that led me on a very complicated adventure, which I'll get into a little bit later, about trying to figure that out. This is just a kind of the painting I showed before, and this is the small one up here was also a premonition for Brazil, because the first set of paintings is 8 in every size. I made into a big spiral. I made in the gesso. There, that. Let me see how I can. Okay, that sort of explains it. Like, so each panel had, you know, that shows out their nesting and how that shape, that Fibonacci spiral, can kind of direct what happens on top of it or spin. And actually, all this stuff happened with that kind of pattern. So you see that dog up there. The black and white is what I call gesso, because I need to do that emotionally. It is gesso, but I have to now admit that it's also painting. But I only admitted that very recently. So anyway, it became a really interesting problem to situate images in that shape. And this is this very spooky dog that had only 3 legs that I met. The day that I saw that paleo glyphs, and this is when we were on our way to go see there was this huge canoe that the man said, "Oh, we just found this canoe in the river," and the canoe was about double the size of this room, and it was just a carved out tree and this 3-legged dog. And I mean, that's like Brazil. That's what it's every second is like that. So this is the gesso showing kind of like all these different kinds of patterns that could happen. These things that Peter's holding up are these kind of templates I have for the edges, and they're always the shape of the dimensions of other panels. Then just trying to hang paintings in different ways. I was trying desperately to figure out, by the time the show was going to happen in New York in December, you know, what would go into the first room. I still didn't know, because it was still a mystery of how to kind of, how to make a reason behind these rooms and these images, literally. So this is that's the first. So we basically rebuilt the model in the gallery at Gladstone Gallery, and the curve is just with burlap, and we have the shape up there to sort of show it. So you walk in, and you saw those paintings, and it gives you an idea of, you know, like, for example, I brought these 3 paintings in on the left. I had never seen them like that before, and I only figured it out hanging the show to put them all together on a shelf. So they're really very, very dispersed in a way when I get to the space, but hopefully they're painted in such a way that these connections are activated. That's what I'm trying to say. Whoops, that was a mistake. Oh, I see. So that's not exactly how we ended up doing it, but it gives you an idea up, you know, what's that called? In plan. So you walk in there, but then I changed it after a while so that there will be just one room here, one room there, one room there, and one room there. So 1, 2, 3, 4 rooms. And then it was just really interesting because there was no way to really understand what it would feel like how the paintings would feel in that space. And it was interesting because it was completely, not centrifugal, what's the opposite? It like dispersed out. It's like they almost wanted to fly out into space. It didn't hold it, because usually pavilions privilege your viewpoint, you know, of you can see everything. But this pavilion, when you're in the center of it, you could see kind of nothing. So that was actually really appropriate and good, I felt, in the end. Is that this door shape that was this thing I just wanted to show came from, for example, just as an example of how these doors that are these kind of Baroque doors that are in the area, the vicinity of where you know Jim is, and I really was struck by how oppy those doors were and strange and beautiful. So it was funny because the Brazilians, they all immediately got that reference. And then there's the Angelus. That's what I'm trying to say. There's the Angelus peeking out. So I hand painted a copy of it and then put it on an op pattern and then painted the top edge up there. You can't really see it here, but oh, maybe if I go like that, you can see it. Oh, yeah. There was fluorescent pink and yellow on the top, so there's this sort of strange, very subtle glow. But it was interesting because the Voyelle also had a preview of Utopico, and Utopico has a preview of the Brazil chapter. And then this is the next room. This is also, this image is just it was a little seed I brought back illegally in the plane. I lied. And it's just, I just used that image and blew it up and then painted it over with encaustic. And this is the portrait, because often I have portraits in chapters, which are they're sort of meta subjects in each chapter. And so a meta subject, I would say, is other artists in my world that I'm interested in or like. And so that's Don Casper. And I don't know what I really can say about it, but it worked, I think. It's an American flag behind which was, I was like, I don't think I really can do that American flag there. But this handy dandy little panel, you just barely see it. This was a painting that I worked so long on, this painting obsessively, and didn't even end up putting it in the show. So often there'll be a lot more paintings that I end up hanging, but they're still part of the chapter. Okay, moving into Israel. This is I went to see the Dead Sea one day, and so is that eerie landscape. And this is the storage room of the Tel Aviv Museum that they brought me down because I like to see storage rooms. And there's a Barret painting and Augustin. I just love that. Just okay, so back to the Angelus. Does this do something? Yes. Okay. So my idea, other than the whole print thing, whoops, sorry. Okay, see, this shows more clearly what I mean when I say it's on an old engraving. You see? And there's an initial there, CL, and it looks like it says 1520 something. And you can tell it's a portrait because there are these folds of the fabric here. It's like pleated fabric and then an arm here. So basically, the museum, they want to find out what's behind it, but they couldn't afford it. So they said, if you pay for it, we'll do it. And then I said, yes, I will pay for it. But then we came up with the idea that I would give them a painting instead. But this may backfire for various reasons because they can't figure it out. And the reason they can't well, they brought it all the way to Rome, first of all, which made me very alarmed, actually. I thought that was weird. Okay, this is what they got. Finally, because X-ray didn't work, infrared didn't work, so they're like, thermography, that's going to work. Thermography. It didn't work. So this is what it gave us. I mean, I can't even believe they thought that would work. But actually, it's a pretty good image, I think, so I might have to use that. It is a good image. But I get a lot of images like this. I have a lot. And I finally went, I mean, I had to go for another reason, but I went to visit the physicists, the scientists in Rome, on the outskirts of Rome, in this university with this incredible machinery, who no one ever came to visit them. So they were just like, hello, world. They were so excited to show me. And they were so like, this is what we discovered. And then I'd be like, what? What did you discover? They say, that looks a little different than that. And basically, they discovered that there's a weird air pocket under right on top of his head. But the scientist there took this with his phone, this image, and I love it. That's my favorite image. Because he wanted, as he explained it, to see it in raking light. And I think that's so kind of alarming that it's so wrinkly and strange. No, not that wrinkly. I felt so, right? The whole thing gets more and stranger and stranger and stranger as farther I go with this image. Because then I go look in the catalog raisonné, full page, fancy color illustration, and they've taken it out in the catalog raisonné. It's just like they just took it out. Yeah, photoshopped. Yeah, so strange. So that was this is another image I might work with up on the right-hand corner, which I just accidentally saw on the computer. And it's Ferguson, I guess. It's Ferguson, but I like it for other reasons. Well, that reason too, but also I think, well, anyway, I better make that painting first and then we'll talk about it. So anyway, so then I do have a title, I think. Get ready. It sounds weird. It's ha 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 ha. I don't know. Are there any Hebrew speakers here? No. All right. Basically, it's the word for engrave in Hebrew, which also is the word for law, and it's also the sound. It's pretty great. And it's going to be, it is what it sounds like. It's disgust and anger, too. It's a kind of, it has a lot of emotion, the letter, or chet. It's actually chet. That's how it's spelled. And those are the kind of the size panels I'm going to use and the number of them I'm going to use. This is an early one where I just printed the edge of the engraving on a gesso gray background. So the gesso a little bit looks like just fabric draped over something. And for the gesso pattern though, now for the chapter, because that's gone, that was just a preliminary thing, I'm going to use, it's going to be black, brown, and white in all the paintings, which is very clayish, and it also feels very not me to just frame it, because if there's one thing I've been really militantly against, it's the bounded picture. I mean, what I always like is how a picture is affected by its neighbor. That's what interests me, like how you can create, in a sense, a sentence through a series of images. So in a sense, I'm already setting up a kind of problem that way. What was the other thing? Oh, this is just a diagram of how, like, this is I was, what is this that you're doing? And actually it's really interesting because they invented this technique in Italy to understand old manuscripts, because apparently old manuscripts are bound with even older manuscripts, so that all these ancient books that in Israel and in Italy and everywhere have themselves are made with older and older books. So they're now researching these texts, and I love that idea too. That totally makes sense with what I'm thinking about. Exactly, yeah, they would never throw it out. And then, also the other thing I did in Israel, which was I love so much, was I went to Herod's tomb, which is, they just happened to be having a big exhibition of it in the museum, and we got an incredible tour with the archaeologists around this beautiful site. But one of the things that struck me there was these frescoes on the wall that were literally made in Herod's lifetime, so that's around Christ time, I guess, the turn A.D. B.C. time, year 1 or whatever. But I just thought this was so strange because it's a window, but the shutters seem to be going into the wall. It's just like counterintuitive to the picture space, is what I'm trying to say, And I just think that's so interesting because also it's perspective, and there's something that I can't put into words that's similar to the Angelus. That's what I'm trying to stutter my way towards. So that's I try to draw these sources together, I'd say, I guess, is what I'm trying in my kind of stuttering way to say. Here is another image. I also became very, very interested in Gershom Scholem and went to his library and went through, because he has his library in the university in Jerusalem. And he was this wonderful scholar of Kabbalah, and so there's incredible old books, and that has led me to a lot of reading about literally language, and back to Claude Lévi-Strauss, and how these ideas about that him and Walter Benjamin were discussing very much about Cubism, actually, and how Scholem, who started out as a mathematician but later became a kind of historian of the Kabbalah, he felt that basically the goal of Cubism should be to take out all color and all reference to the world, because titles, as we know, is a huge issue with Cubism because it explains what it is, and that it will only become like mathematical symbols, and that would be the best. That would be great if that could happen. And it's so, in a way, it's very Hebraic, and it's also, in a funny way, what did happen, but maybe not quite as clearly as he thinks it might happen. But then I was reading today to just try to prepare for this, because I've invited this historian to write an essay for this chapter. And she has unpublished, but she sent me the proofs of this book on clay and exactly these issues. So it's really interesting because it gets at what you were mentioning that you've been discussing before. Yeah, just simply the legibility of images is basically what I feel like. If you're going to be a painter, you need to, that's basically the problem. What are images? And I think that is really, there's no more important problem, I think, in art, and its legibility. And so, actually, I do think images are becoming more and more linguistic. And they like, let's see, what did I say? Yeah, this is where normally I would have it all written down. Not right now, but the thing is, it's just very important, I think, if you are making paintings, to be very, very super aware of what you're experiencing when you look at an image. Like, it's just such an interesting fact that a word is an image. I mean, that's the only way to explain what a word is with an image or a name. what is a name? Like, you are your image, in a sense. It's the only way to explain what it is, what language is. And I like this idea in a certain school of Kabbalah, which I love, this idea that basically everything in the world can be explained. There's 31 gates, because there's 22 Hebrew letters and 10 numbers, and you can explain everything with those things. And that's kind of probably true. I mean, in a way. So I also really love this whole kind of confusion of, just the drawing of those letters I find so beautiful. And also they really are feeling backwards, not just because you read from left to right. Wait, am I doing that right? No. Well, no, the other way. From right to left, you read, but they also look upside down. Because, for example, the L, Lamed, I always think it should be the other way because it's above the line. It's like G upside down or something. And it feels almost as if it was an alphabet meant that we're seeing it from the other side, in a sense. This is another clever image in the storage room, I thought. Here's an example of, in Sholom's library, he has a stamp that he stamps on ideas and pages that he likes, the circular thing. So I found that Walt Whitman book and stamp. I love that. And then Ceylon, beautiful Ceylon books, and beautiful books of Benjamin with these beautiful dedications to him. And yeah, well, gosh, that's my studio. Trying to figure it out. Yeah, I don't know. I guess can I open it up to some questions, or are you totally baffled? Because actually what I want to say is, so now what? Like, if I'm going to do, what would be a retrospective? Like, well, how am I going to start summing this up? And where is it going? Because it does seem where it was so sort of neatly divided that before chapter to chapter, now it gets harder each chapter because each chapter has to take on the past subject. It has to develop into something. It can't just be these isolated exhibitions, which is the whole reason for the structure in the first place, so that they would be an overarching idea. Right. So that's where I don't know. I literally don't know. And what will LA be in this? Like, that's hard. LA. I think it's going to have to do something to be with the West, and the sun, I guess. But I don't know. Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah. The op patterns I kind of discovered pretty early on that they resonated very well with adjacent paintings, and that they kind of left an after image for one, and they also were optically a very, very different kind of experience and had a different kind of time to them. Like, it's very hard to look at an op painting. In fact, you don't want to look at them. They kind of propel you forward. And there was this essay I went through by David Hickey, and he said that op paintings are like little engines that keep the audience just moving. And I thought that was so true. I like that idea. And I like the idea to have certain categories, which every chapter, or most chapters, will have one. So every chapter will have its own op pattern that seems to resonate with the subject. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's where its value is. I'll say that. That's where its primary value is. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So what do I do when they're dispersed in my home? Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is the problem. Like, right? Or is it even a book? Like, how far can I take conceptually? But like, yeah, how if I try to make a conclusion to 10 chapters, how do you even paint that or floor plans? Yeah. I always just take all the installations and do them as floor plans. But that wouldn't be very satisfying to look at. Yeah, but number one is you have to make a painting that somebody want to look at. That's the number one thing. You can't be making an image that'll be just like, you have to somehow grab. It has to be a picture. But I do like the idea of thinking about the installations. I like that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, well, with the spine, I made it literally the floor plan into a kind of book, and so there was 3 pages book, and but I have these ideas, and then I'm always don't even understand where it's going to lead at all, and I'm often just so surprised, and it's been so great to realize that when you do have a structure, it really does a lot of work for you that you don't have to, it's, yeah. Yeah. Right. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Well, profiles is another thing I really am always interested in, too. Profiles of faces. Just through reading. And then I saw, because I was reading no, it was because I agreed to be in this show in Vienna, and I had to think Vienna suddenly from Brazil. And then suddenly it was just a little button or something that I could attach it with. A little thing. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's because if you, I mean, it's internal to the system in a sense, because if you are saying all the work is one, each unit is part of a larger whole, it's got to start being something, that larger whole. It's got to be adding up in a sense. The demand became harder. Like, what are you interested in, Rebecca, with this idea? Why would you do it? Why would you do that? Where and how am I going to hone in on the subjects I depict in an image, because that was something I wasn't understanding a lot clearly what that was. Not that I'm understanding it yet either exactly, but I'm kind of really trying to understand it more. And so I think, but I have to try to understand it via my response to this geography that I can kind of now choose in a way. I can kind of direct where the boat is going to go, whereas before it was, yeah, I'll take it, just to get a show or something. It was more chaotic before. And so now it's more, directed, I guess. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Wow, most people say, oh yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. About the edge of the panel or the edge of the picture? Uh-huh. Oh yeah. Huh. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Why the word? The book. It just began as a kind of like metaphor of what I hoped it would be. But now I do really think that it is a negotiation with language. And I am drawing on a linguistic model that I felt frustrated by the lack of legibility, and how to make it, and where to locate it, and especially with abstraction. That's what I was mostly interested in, still to this day. More. Oh yeah. I don't know that. Oh yeah. Oh wow, I don't know those. I don't know those. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like the word book is sort of silly and I'm annoyed by it, but it just seemed like a clear way to explain what I'm meant to be doing, like my hope, I guess, because that it's all one in a sense, that I am trying to have an idea about painting that is really hard to get to and to record it, that sort of places I have to travel to get to that idea or ideas or whatever. I don't know what it'll be exactly, but it's just also been really so surprising to me how the system generates itself, and it makes me do things that never in a million years would I have thought of doing that had I just been like, oh, what am I going to paint on this blank panel or canvas? If I had kept with that problem, it would have been all over. Good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Listen, you don't know how I've been trying to. I mean, it's actually a problem how obsessed I am with it because I get very, very distracted by it. But there's these incredible books of initials in every language that just like are just hundreds and hundreds of pages of just like, you know, Joe Schmo would J.S. this way and that one, and then so you could identify prints. But still, I mean, Lucas Cranach, but no, because one of the problems is it's on later paper than 15th century. So I think it's basically, my hunch is that it's a reproduction of a kind of an engraving where you would get when you would go visit museums before photography, that you would get a portfolio of reproductions of works in the collection. And they're very cheap, and they're still cheap to this day, like in stalls and stuff. I think it's one of those. I think it's a reproduction of an older thing. Well, I think he always mounted on something darker. He always wanted a dark rim, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm just beginning to read about him more now. So I'm not exactly sure, but I really want to know, because it does seem to be a portrait. Definitely. It's got to be a portrait. It's not a landscape. It's not an object. It's a portrait. And then you want to know, is it a nun? Is it a priest? Is it a philosopher? You know, is it God? What is it? You just want to know. But I don't think we're going to know. You know why we're not going to know? It's because his technique that he did, which I duplicated, because I wanted to actually send a sample to the scientists before they sent the thing itself, because I was alarmed at that idea, it's a very elaborate process he had of reproducing his own drawings. And all his work, he's mostly interested in drawing. And legibility, and all these issues I've been talking about. He was really, really engaged with that. But he would, if he made a drawing that he liked, then he would reproduce it by wetting this paper, this Japanese paper often, and then he would roll black printer's ink on the back of it and trace the drawing, and then sell that. So it's a kind of monoprint. But I think when you put black printer's ink on the back of a drawing, it's probably degraded the print by now. So I think it's probably not even there. That's what I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Right. Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. It's amazing that to have friends who have seen that.
And the sun was laid out, all of the elements were already there.
Yeah.
So
The silk screen, the
it was laid out in such a way that it was essentially
Mm-hmm.
and this to me is in a way a parallel to that insofar as if one were to set up a system, a set of rules from which one would adhere to,
Mm-hmm.
the sun to me was very much that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very, very touched by the constraint that you feel on almost every painting. Like, how am I going to finish the painting? What am I looking at?
Yeah.
What is the, what is the, in a sense, length that could make this possible?
Mm-hmm.
And
We put it.
Strauss writes about something which, in some ways, makes that particular length that gives you life.
Exactly, yeah.
So, in some ways, the constraint is the thing that makes this kind of texture of unfreedom that you feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I like it.
And that's,
Yeah.
that in some way is just
Like a knot. Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. I like it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and for a while I was thinking I should just bring the paintings from chapter 1 that I still have, because weirdly I have a lot of them still, and just show those in Israel, or include them in the chapter as a kind of nodding back, and so, and they would work totally, but almost too well, because they very much referencing, my father and the Holocaust and the whole deal. Yes, the West. Setting. Mm-hmm. I know. Yeah. But it was there, but in retrospect, also those paintings are so weak to me now. I just really just learned a lot in a way, like what it suggested. Like, if you can set it up, if you can figure out, basically to me, the rules are things that I don't want to think about anymore. Like, that I'm not interested in anymore. The rules, like the size and the medium. And then and then once you have that, then all these things that you couldn't on your own. That was a really, I mean, I've said that already tonight, but that was just such a good thing to learn that. And also, God, I'm really a late bloomer. I mean, because in chapter 1 I was 40. So, they looked very much the same, but there was no overarching system. But they were made the same way, but there wasn't a kind of logic to their dimensions, or to this idea that I'm kind of researching things at the same time, or in a way writing a kind of eccentric art history or something. So they totally led me to my rules. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I had to go to Poland around that time, and that helped. Studying this artist Cobro, kind of set the whole thing going. That's sort of what started it off. Yeah. But also, I really like this idea that around, I was reading earlier today, like around the turn of the century, that there was this kind of, that people really loved kind of pictures that were trick pictures that you had to apply words to. Like, what is a picture? You have to have what kind of picture says the words are missing? I like that idea. And also, I also really love trick pictures, like double readings and hidden images and things like that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. This was a really beautiful one. Well, they're either, yeah, the spine, it's called Spine. That was, but I'm going to do another one for here. So in a sense, it'll be the second volume, Spine, for Mocha. But I don't know what to call it. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I'm more the institutional part of if you could say there's any critique at all, it would be, oh, is that a fire drill? No. It would be to say, it's an institution doesn't want me to talk about it, okay? No, but it would be from the perspective of the painting. Turned out to, basically, it's more of a problem of how now I'm at auction. That's the institution I'm more, is the burning problem or issue or not problem or whatever it is. It's a little bit of an institution in my that I have to deal with right now, which is surprising, and I wasn't even thinking about it. That kind of institution, the money institution. Yeah, but what I realized was that unconsciously, for some reason, I kind of tapped unconsciously into collector fetish by accident. Because you can say, oh, I have this chapter or that chapter or this size or that size, and you can start doing your own, like one guy only has my arrows. It's a kind of weird, it's like clothing. Like I only like that season of blah, blah, blah. So you can become an expert in a way on a very, I see it now happening. That's how that happened. I mean, I don't know how that happened, but it did happen. It must have come from me in my shopping self. I don't know. But also, I guess it's just, yeah, the status of a kind of installation and how a show is curated. I just love and I'm fascinated by in collections. You know. That's why I love May I Help You so much. It's the best. It's such a breakthrough in a way for me to see that. And Alan is tomorrow night, which is so ironic. Did you know that Alan's speaking here? Yeah. So we all came together with Alan. It is kind of fire drillish kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like how we're just like, oh well. It's an artist talk. Oh, they're really in a panic. Well, should we panic? You think we should go? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can.